personalised health and wellbeing plan, which includes signposting or referral to further resources and community support. So we're currently offering remote support via telephone and attend anywhere video consultation. But to find out more, please do visit our website or get in touch via phone or email as listed on the slide. So today we're going to be providing an overview and introduction to mindful eating. So just to note, I am by no means a mindful eating expert, but as this was a requested topic, we thought it would be useful to share kind of a definition and some key concepts of mindful eating, tips for applying mindful eating in practice, as well as further resources if this is a topic that you would like to explore further. In addition to note, I think it is important just to say that mindful eating may not be appropriate for everyone, and this approach might not be suitable for those with an active eating disorder. So please do keep this in mind this afternoon, and we recommend speaking with your GP or visiting the Beat UK website for further information and support if required. So, as we get into the main content of today's session, I'd just like to ask you to spend a few moments reflecting on some of the following questions in relation to your own eating experiences. So you might wish to do this kind of privately, just in your head or by writing something down, or you might like to share anything that you feel is relevant in the chat box. So if we could just take a moment to consider the following questions. How often do I eat something just because it's there? Get halfway through eating something and ask myself, why am I eating this? And how often do I find myself feeling uncomfortable after eating, and this happening more often than I might like? And then in contrast, I'd now like to think about the following prompts. So how often do I show a moment of gratitude for food I am about to eat? Allow myself to sit down and eat without distraction? And how often do I acknowledge my eating experiences with self-compassion? So some of these questions might feel a little bit odd at the moment, but hopefully what they'll do is start to build a little bit of insight for you as to what your current approach to eating might be like. There is no right or wrong way, we're simply just noticing without judgment. And you might like to hold some of these questions in your mind as we move forwards. So when we're thinking about mindful eating, it's usually quite helpful to kind of break it down into smaller concepts, as the idea can feel quite abstract. So in terms of mindfulness, that is the idea of bringing awareness into the present moment non-judgmentally. Mark Williams, former director of the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, says this about mindfulness. So mindfulness means knowing directly what's going on inside and outside of ourselves, moment to moment. It's easy to stop noticing the world around us, and it's also easy to lose touch with the way we're feeling and to end up living in our heads or being caught up in our thoughts without stopping to notice how these thoughts might be driving our emotions and behaviour. An important part of mindfulness is reconnecting with our bodies and the sensations they experience. This means waking up to the sights, sounds, smells, and taste of the present moment. So this could be something as simple as feeling the table with our hands that we're sitting at. He goes on to say that another part of mindfulness is an awareness of our thoughts and feelings as they happen moment to moment. It's about allowing ourselves to see the present moment clearly. And when we do that, it can positively change the way we see ourselves and our lives. Mindfulness can essentially help us to understand ourselves better. So, holding this in our minds then, we can think of mindful eating as the process of developing specific awareness of the present moment in the context of our interactions with food and eating, again, without judgment. So the point is to bring awareness and pay closer attention to sensations, habits, triggers, or cues that may be associated with food and eating. And the British Dietetic Association goes on to include that mindful eating consists of allowing ourselves to become aware of the positive and nurturing opportunities that are available through food selection by respecting our own inner wisdom, by using all of our senses to eat food that is both satisfying and nourishing to ourselves and our bodies, becoming aware of physical hunger and satiety cues to guide our decisions to begin and end eating, and finally, again, acknowledging responses to food without judgment. So as you can see, mindful eating is not just about the tasting part. There are so many ways that we can bring mindfulness into any aspect of eating. So it could be kind of tending to vegetables or herbs we might grow, chopping ingredients and preparing meals, tasting a meal, and becoming attuned to some of those bodily sensations that we might experience. There are many mindfulness skills we can bring to eating that extends beyond the actual act of eating itself. It's also important to note that mindful eating is a practice rather than a skill. So it is something that can take time to develop and practice, but becomes easier with repetition as we develop new neural pathways. So the purpose of mindful eating is to support people to slow down enough to get curious about their eating experiences and pay close attention to any sensations that can be noticed, repeated behaviours, and any cues to start, continue, or finishing eating. So when we slow down, we're able to think more clearly and respond rather than react, particularly when reactions might be habitual or repetitive. This can provide us with the opportunity to be less judgmental towards ourselves and engage in a more curious and compassionate stance as we navigate these eating experiences. And some studies suggest that this can help to promote a healthier relationship with food. Mindful eating can also open up the opportunity to appreciate food more and make better connections with it, and also help to regulate appetite, aid digestion, and ultimately make eating a more enjoyable and pleasurable experience by noticing kind of what best nourishes us, what gives us energy, and what leaves us feeling satisfied. So if we're feeling that mindful eating may be an appropriate and useful concept to explore further, it can be helpful to consider some of the core principles of the approach. So as a general overview, the key principles of mindfulness are to cultivate a sense of awareness and observation of our eating experience, and staying curious while aiming to leave judgment to the side. I appreciate that this is quite a lot to get our heads around, so let's break it down into some smaller principles. So one of the foundational principles of mindful eating is awareness. So awareness invites us into a state of calm and focused attention that enables us to tune into senses and body sensations and enables us to bring that non-judgmental awareness to responses and experiences that we notice. Observation involves us being witness to our thoughts, emotions, and sensations in relation to food and eating. It involves us seeing things as they are rather than labeling them or seeing them how they should be. Curiosity, so taking a curious stance to our eating experiences can help us to ask what's going on or showing up for us in a gentle and compassionate way. And in terms of tuning in, this relates to what is it that we can be paying attention to. So this could include physical characteristics of food. It could be tuning into repetitive habits and the process of eating. So this could be something like eating the same food at the same time each day, or perhaps noticing that we're on our phones at the same time that we're eating. So in mindful eating, rather than labeling this as something as bad or something that we shouldn't be doing, we can simply notice, pause, and choose what feels most supportive for us right now. So we could continue as we are. That's not a bad choice, just a choice. We might put down our phones and focus on our food, or we might choose to put down our food and focus on our phone. But the essence really is to just be doing one of these things at a time. So none of these things are necessarily better choices, but one may align more with being in tune with our bodies and our self-care practices for that present moment. We can also tune into cues and triggers that might lead us to eat less mindfully, or tune into sensations in our body, such as exploring nuances and changing sensations in our appetite experience or the sensory experience of food. So another principle is connection. So an aim of mindful eating is to maintain connection with the present moment experience. This is something that can feel uncomfortable if we aren't used to experiencing it, which is why it's really important to remain kind of curious and open-minded with what comes up for us. And then finally, letting go of judgments. So letting go of judgments towards ourselves can be really tricky, yet being kinder to ourselves is more likely to open the doors towards well-being. If we're noticing ourselves getting stuck in judgment, we can aim to loosen the grip and not get caught in judging. So as well as thinking about what mindful eating is, it's also useful to think about what mindful eating is not. So mindful eating is not a diet. Mindful eating can be used as a framework to guide more attuned food choices, but the objective is not weight loss. Whilst mindful eating may lead some people to lose weight, others may find that their weight may stay the same or it may even increase. But this is not the main point of the approach. Mindful eating is also not about perfection. So there may be many reasons why it's not always practical to eat completely mindfully or to do so all of the time. That is okay. It's also not about having strict rules to eating. So the concepts and techniques serve as a framework to guide our eating. And a phrase that I often use in multiple areas of my role is to say that these things are tools rather than rules. And then we've mentioned this a few times already, but mindful eating is not about judging. It's really important not to be judgmental around our eating experience, or if we notice we're perhaps not eating as mindfully as we may like to be. So what we're going to do now is just talk through a couple of practices that are associated with mindful eating. So this is tuning into our hunger and satiety cues, the 3 S's model, and mindful bites. So considering hunger and fullness, as well as using the knowledge that we might already have about food and nutrition, our bodies actually give us some really useful cues as to how we might be able to best nourish it to suit our needs. But this can be quite hard to pick up on if we're not used to doing it. So if we were to really start paying attention to sensations of hunger, how or where might hunger show up for us? And as we go through this hunger fullness body map, please do feel free to share any kind of descriptives or phrases that you might associate with hunger or fullness. So in terms of hunger, it might show up in our mood, our energy levels, in our stomachs, in our heads, in our bodies, or elsewhere. And in contrast, if we were to really start paying attention to sensations of fullness, we can start to notice how these might show up for us in our bodies. So we can think of hunger with some of the associated words, and you might relate with these words on the screen more or less than others, but that's absolutely fine. But yeah, in our heads, we might feel achy or lightheaded. We might have poor concentration levels. We might feel weak. I know I am aware of this one, but if I'm really hungry, I often feel quite irritable or snappy. So I always make sure I've got some snacks on hand. Or we might start to feel kind of low in our energy levels, and we might notice those real physical sensations in our stomach. So it might be gurgling or rumbling. And then in contrast, if we were to think about tuning into our fullness levels, Again, these might show up in similar areas of our bodies, but in different ways. So after we've had a nourishing, satisfying meal, we might feel more able to concentrate. We might notice that our eating slows down. We might feel more content and happy. Our energy levels might feel kind of recharged. And we might notice those gentle feelings of fullness, which can include kind of some slight bloating or gurgling as our stomachs get to work on digesting that food. So thinking about those different sensations, how might we use this to guide our eating? So this picture is something that we call a hunger and fullness gauge, and it can help to visualize what feelings of hunger and fullness might look like. So on the left, we have 0, which is completely empty. And you might like to reflect on how that feels for you. And then on the right, we have completely full. And again, that's going to feel very different for everybody. But you might like to think about how you feel at each of those points and the subsequent points in between. So if we let ourselves get too hungry, this can feel really uncomfortable, and when we next eat can lead us to eat more quickly and past a point of comfortable fullness, which in turn doesn't feel too great either. So as a guide, it can be useful to aim to start eating when we might be at a gentle level of hunger, around about a 3, and aim to stop eating when we're at a comfortable level of fullness, which we might consider to be around a 7. So again, signs of comfortable fullness might include things like our pace of eating slowing down or our food tasting a little bit less enjoyable. So as we go through this gauge, if you feel comfortable, please feel free to kind of have a practice of rating your current feelings of hunger or fullness from 0 to 10, either privately or by typing in the chat box if you wish. So again, this gauge isn't a rule to eating, but a tool. And there may be many reasons why it's not always possible to eat within this range, practical or otherwise. So for these reasons, it's really important that, again, we can approach these experiences with kindness and curiosity, keeping in mind what feels most practical for us. And this is going to be different for everybody. So moving on to the 3 S's model, this is something that can help us to remember the actions that support mindful eating. So the first S is sitting. Oh, and I've just seen Catherine has kindly shared that she's about a 5, so pretty neutral, which, yeah, is not bad considering it's not too far away from dinner time. So yeah, going back to sitting, this is quite obvious, but essentially sitting down in a comfortable chair in a pleasant eating environment is going to make it more likely that we can apply some of these mindful eating principles. And with that, we can aim to kind of minimize distractions to our eating. So this might include kind of putting our phones away, turning off the TV, or aiming to not eat on the go can enable us to really kind of enjoy our food in the moment. So one thing at a time if we can. The second S is slowing down. So by taking time to pause while we're eating, such as putting cutlery or food down in between bites, or making sure we're chewing our food thoroughly, can really help to slow down our pace of eating and in turn allow us to become more attuned to body sensations such as hunger, fullness, and taste. So you might like to try pausing halfway through a meal so you can reassess hunger, eating, and pleasure status. And what this pause can do is provide us with the opportunity to decide to continue if we're still hungry and enjoying it, or put the rest away for later. And if we're finding that we're consistently feeling overfull or perhaps not satisfied from our meals, we might wish to consider some adjustments there to reflect that. And then the third S is savouring our food. So consider when you might most enjoy eating a particular meal or snack. Many of us can be tempted to eat whilst we're preparing a meal or whilst we're on our feet at work. But if we can start to think about when we're going to be more relaxed and in a pleasurable environment and more able to give food our full attention, we're more likely to get more satisfaction from it. And in addition to this, being able to really taste and savor our food can make meal times more enjoyable. So using as many senses as possible can help with this, which is explored in an exercise called Mindful Bites. So here you might like to imagine you're eating a particular food. It could be something that's familiar or something that's completely new. Or even if you had some food to hand right now, you could try this in real time. And Natasha's very helpfully held up. Is that a Satsuma, I think? Thank you for the live demonstration, Natasha. So when we're really thinking about engaging all of our senses, we can start with sight. So if we're looking at the food, what do we notice? What color is it? What shape is it? What stands out? So you might like to think of yourself as an alien who's just landed on this earth and they've never seen this particular food before. Really try and bring and instill that sense of curiosity. Next is feel. So when you hold it in your hand, what does it feel like? Is it soft or hard? Is it squishy or rough? What else might you notice? And you might also like to consider where the food is from and the journey it's taken to get all the way to you, whether that's from growing, manufacturing, or to all the people that have been involved in its transportation. So next is hear. Does it make any sounds? So Natasha, you might have heard something as you peeled off the peel. And if you squeeze it in your fingers, does it make a sound? And you might like to revisit this during the taste section. So next is smell. So bring the food to your nose. Does it have a smell? How might you describe the smell? And then this brings us on to taste. So put the food in your mouth and notice the flavors on your tongue. You could try holding it between your teeth. Is there a strong urge to bite? What does that anticipation feel like? And then as you bite into the food, really notice the flavors. So do they change? How does it develop over time? How intense is the flavor? And how might the texture change in your mouth? Then you might like to take a moment longer to finish chewing slowly before swallowing and noticing those sensations as you swallow and the changing flavors. So as you can see, as it's been so beautifully demonstrated by Natasha, there are a lot of sensory experiences that can be noticed during our eating. And it might be that you don't have chance or the opportunity to consider all of these sensory experiences, but there may be just one or two that next time you have something to eat, you might like to try and tune into. So when we first start to explore mindful eating, what can happen is that we might actually become more attuned to the moments when we notice we're not eating mindfully. And this can happen particularly after that eating event has occurred. This is okay, it's completely normal and it's very common. So in these situations, we can apply the core principles of mindful eating with an additional focus on self-compassion. So talking kindly to ourselves rather than being harsh or critical, aiming to tune in, get curious, drop the judgment and add self-compassion. So some things that we might say to ourselves include, what happened here? Is there anything I can take or learn from this experience? And what might best meet my needs right now? So there's a reason the phrase is called trial and error rather than trial and trial. So error is not a bad thing. Rather, every experience that we have is an opportunity to learn and gives us that potential space for change. So as today's session draws to a close, I thought I'd share this summary of the characteristics of someone who might eat mindfully. So that person may acknowledge that there's no right or wrong way to eat, but varying degrees of awareness surrounding their experience of food. They might accept that their eating experiences are unique. They might be an individual who, by choice, directs their attention to eating on a moment-to-moment basis. And this person might become more aware of the interconnection between human experience and food. So moving on to some reflections, these are just some prompts that you might like to consider after listening this afternoon. So what might mindful eating mean to you in your personal experience of eating? What mindful eating tools might support you in exploring eating more mindfully? And what opportunities might we have to explore this further? So this could be something like deciding on a meal or snack time to practice your mindful eating, starting or ending a meal or snack with just one mindful bite, putting your phone away at your next evening meal, or even really developing awareness of the different ingredients you're using as you're preparing or cooking a meal. So if you would like to learn more about mindful eating and how you might incorporate some of these tools and techniques for yourself, we thought that the following resources might be helpful. So Headspace have a 30-day mindful eating course that guides people in better understanding why we eat the way we do and the thoughts that drive our choices. They do also have a shorter 7-day mindful eating plan, as well as lots of tips for eating mindfully. And as far as I'm aware, I think NHS employees are eligible to receive free access to Headspace Plus until December. There's also the British Dietetic Association Mindful Eating Food Fact Sheet. And then finally, the Centre for Mindful Eating website, which has several free mindful eating guided activities that you might like to try. So this brings us to the end of today's Wellbeing webinar. We'd like to thank you for your time in attending today, and we look forward to delivering future webinars again soon. So if you would like to get in touch with us at Here for Health, you can use any of the options on screen. So what we will do now is stop the recording. Natasha, if you'd be so kind as to do that. And then we will just allow a few moments for any kind of questions, queries, comments,